You know what, guys? I'm just so impressed. You are the ones who'll make it in the profession because you're showing adaptability, versatility, temerity, commitment, all those really important qualities that teachers have to survive. Because it is a tough gig out there. All right, backward mapping. It's so nice to hear you in the background, actually. It's really cool. Jump in at any time. Backward mapping and differentiation. This is where we're heading today if you've looked at week 3. So I'm going to give you a moment just to read that. That is a really welcome, Andrew. Join us. I don't know if you want to share space. This is really quite a loaded paragraph. There's a lot happening in it. And I reckon this is something that we're all going to puzzle over and talk about in staff meetings and with colleagues. We're going to scratch our head and we're going to go, I don't understand. I've explained this 5 different ways. What's going on? Or I taught this last year, why is it not being transferred to the following year, even though the same student might be in your class 2 consecutive years? And I suppose I'm flagging that as just something to be mindful of because it really does underpin everything that we're talking about today. I honestly believe, and this is my own personal viewpoint, that the best teachers, the really effective teachers, understand the learner and genuinely connect with that learner and recognise ways of reaching that learner using lots of different strategies, which come with time and experience. So no one expects teachers to be world-changing, revolutionary. It's not about that. Most amazing things can happen throughout a year in bits and pieces with these students as your relationship with them grows. But if we are not mindful of the learner, if that is not the focus of everything we think, everything we say, and everything we do, then the chances are we're going to miss giving learners that really critical piece of the puzzle that enables them to understand. And a classic example occurred on the weekend. I was having a conversation with somebody and I thought it was really clear, crystal clear, and I consider myself to be a relatively effective communicator. And we kept going around in circles. I thought, okay, I'm not getting my message across here. It's me. It's not the receiver of the message. And I could tell that they didn't even know what questions to ask because we were just going nowhere. And then suddenly I realised and I made this comment. And then he went, oh, okay, I get it now. I get it. It was just that one little thing. But if the learner is at the heart of all you do, you're less likely to make those errors, especially in your TLAPs. You know, your TLAPs that you're doing for your second assessment, that will show if the learner is at the centre of everything we do. And we're very busy and very stressed people, teachers. I think we have a very purposeful life and our days feel really meaningful. But in the busyness of the stresses on us, we can sometimes not always focus on differentiating as much. So we're still going to focus in on this, because that is the engine of the syllabus. And in your TLAPs, in your teaching, you want to be able to say to students, we are working on this objective today, or these 2 objectives. If you get this, if you know this and understand this, then that's going to transfer into your assessment instruments and that's going to lead to success. Be able to suggest ways of teaching the skills required by objectives. I want to experiment with that a little bit today. And be able to incorporate scaffolding and teaching and learning experiences, including differentiation. I'm going to give you some really solid ways to do that will give your teaching a real quality to it. But first thing, this is a maths problem. I know we're wordsmiths, we're not number crunchers, but I just want you to have a go at that. You can chat together if you want to. You need to derive the equations of motion for the following systems. Some people can do it really, really quickly.
think you made your point.
Yeah, thank you, I have. It is actually third year engineering, and the answer is 3 parts. No, 3 parts. Now, the reason I like doing that activity is because lots of things happen internally. You're given a problem to solve, you have a go. I saw that you're all looking and concentrating. And then if I had gone longer, you would have drifted off, lost interest, become demotivated, disinterested, and that's exactly what our students do when we come into class and we pitch here instead of here. And we all do it at different times. It's not about perfection, it's not about the perfect lesson, it's just about underpinning differentiation into your teaching and content so that you are able to reach most students most of the time. Because it's not a perfect science. If you think back to that paragraph, how do students learn? How do we learn? It's about being flexible in that. So, how do we differentiate? How do we, because you're going to be pulling out Macbeth, and you're going to have students in your class who don't care 2 hoots about Macbeth, completely disinterested, irrelevant to them. In fact, my son would say that it shouldn't be compulsory because it's another language, just like maths is not another language, it isn't compulsory, so why should Shakespeare be? And you're going to have students who don't want to engage with poetry, so you're going to have some resistant bodies in your room. And sometimes it's because they don't understand. Sometimes it's just because they've got these preconceived ideas. But I guess in a sense that's differentiation too. It's just on an emotional level rather than a cognitive demand level. Any ideas? Picture this. You're going into a classroom. You know you've got students of varying abilities and you're going to be unpacking Macbeth. How are we going to make it digestible? Just any ideas? How about our Zoom players over there? Can you hear okay?
Yeah, I can hear.
Excellent.
Yeah, just making coffee.
Good plan.
But I think maybe I would consider first, if you get a sense of your age group. So what's it going to? It's going to be grade 10, 11?
Probably
Grade 11.
11 or 12.
So I'd maybe have a look around at what's playing in the media landscape at that moment, see if I can find some sort of similarity, some character in some popular show who may be experiencing similar sort of set of emotions to what might play out in Macbeth, and just relate it to something they might already be watching.
That is excellent, and that is what we call bridging, and that is a differentiation strategy that we're talking about. Connecting what you're doing with the student's reality. And I used to find myself doing it all the time. If I was opening Macbeth or Othello, and the character is experiencing jealousy, but in Shakespearean language, I turned to students and say, when was the last time you were jealous? Just think. What did it feel like? Think of the words that come to mind, or those feelings, or those colours that might enter your brain. Now let's go back to the text. Where are the similarities? So really, yes. And it is in popular culture. Shakespeare is, I can think of an exact moment in popular culture, a detective show called Monk. I don't know if you ever watched it, Monk, detective show. One of the very first lines in that show was a line from Macbeth. Simpsons do it all the time. Any other ideas?
I've got one.
Yep.
Sorry, it feels so weird because I can't put my hand up.
I know it does, but we love the fact that you're with us. Go for it.
Something that I learned a little bit about is trying to rearrange the format of the task. Whether that's a lesson or something. So whether that's with graphic organizers or maybe using video format, or either change the format of how I deliver the task to students, or maybe change the format of how they show me their understanding.
I totally get what you're saying, and you're actually, without perhaps deliberately doing it, you're veering into the into another differentiation strategy we talk about called representing text, which I did with my other unit the other week. What I did was I asked them to read the attributes of quality assessment: reliability, validity and accessibility, and to represent that information into a diagram or a song or music, whatever it is that they wanted to. One student did it. She was amazing, and she had drawn some scales. And when I said to her, why did you translate all that information, all those words, because there are words on the QCAA website, very dry reading, she drew these scales. And I said, why did you draw those? And she said, because it's all about equity, justice, and balance. And that's absolutely true. They are the core principles underpinning those three things. So in her mind, she'd made a really strong connection that then hopefully helped other people recognise or understand the abstract concept of those things in a very real form. So yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the first one we're going to talk about is bridging. And these differentiation strategies comes from Walke's, W-A-L-Q-I, and her document is on Blackboard. But you can see it's a beautiful diagram there. We're building a bridge, one to the other. And basically what that is it's making connections between you, the teacher, and the student, and the text, and the student, and the student's lives. And helping them get across from here to here. So how can we do that? Well, we can use an anticipatory guide like this. If you lock one mantra into your brain and your practice, it would be taking students from the familiar to the unfamiliar. But you can't do that if you haven't done Addie's model and you haven't done any diagnostic work and you don't know where your students are at. Which is why knowing and understanding your students is quite helpful, because you know where their knowledge gaps are. But let's assume you all know that. We can get students to fill in this column, what I know, and then the other column, what I would like to know. So let's share our knowledge about this important topic, Indigenous Australian culture and history, by filling in this table quietly as an individual and when prompted, sharing your thoughts with your peers. Do you want to do it, or do you want to move on? It's up to you. Move on, you got it? Yep. It's amazing what will come up, and it's amazing how nervous and anxious some students are, especially with a topic like that. But they start to realise that they do know stuff, but they've never really thought about what they know. And then your teaching can focus on here, but the student has already made connections between what they know and what they'd like to know, and that's hopefully ignited curiosity, which is another really important part of learning. If they're curious, they're halfway there. If they're not curious, it's much harder for you as a teacher to develop skills and knowledge. This is another way you could do it in English classroom. So let's think about the Great Gatsby, which is a prescribed text, or it's on the prescribed text list. We might be wanting to unpack the characters' stories in the novel. We're going to break the novel down into chunks before we start doing some really serious hardcore work. And you could get students to fill in this. And this is exactly what you did in a way. Well, very, very similar. So bridging, but also the one you talk about creeps into a couple. It's a really strong one. So I used to teach 1984, and I would always teach it at the start of a term. It just turned out that way, and it was towards the end of the year. And I really, really wanted the students to understand what it was like for Winston, the main character, who's denied all his privileges. So I worked in a school with privileged students who had their voice, had pretty much most of what they wanted. So at the start of the term, I'd come in, and we call this experiential learning. I'd say, girls on that side, boys on that side. Do not speak. You have been abusing your privileges in this classroom up for the last couple of terms, and I'm over it. You've been cheating and sending text messages on your phones without me realising it. Well, this is serious now. At the end of the year, you need to know and understand this novel because we're going into an exam. that's it. You're going to, it'll be yes sir, no sir. And they'd look at you because that's not my style at all. And they'd go, okay, and they'd do the thing. And then I'd say, I'd set up a camera, and I'd say, we also need to just keep an eye on things. And they'd sit down, and I'd give them a really boring activity to do, and it was generally spelling or punctuation, something along those lines. And I'd say there was no speaking at all. At all. I will do the talking, you will sit there. And then I'd say things like, when I deem it appropriate, just to make sure you're all awake and paying attention, I'm going to get you to stand and clap 5 times. And they think I've gone crazy. And then in addition to that, I would take their water bottles off their desks and I would walk around like this. And I'd look at their screens and I'd go, And it was really, really interesting, the reaction from some of the students. So one year, one student started going, she got up really slowly the first time and went, and I knew I was in for a challenge. And okay, and I said, right, quiet, everyone, work again. And they were doing the task. And then a few minutes had passed. And, okay, everyone stand up. Let's clap 5 times. Make sure we're all awake. And she was a bit slower to get up that time. Oh no. And in the meantime, I'm turning my back to the wall to stop myself from, getting a little bit, losing my stern face. And this went a couple of times. Each time she got slower and slower until she eventually went. And everyone else was doing their 5 claps. And I had to look at her and say, if you don't do your 5 claps, it'll be out. And it was killing me. Like, it was really hard to do. And we got through the class. Now, that particular year, I had a Year 11 class at the start of the day and a Year 11 class at the end of the day. So I couldn't actually debrief them. You know what I was doing, don't you? And these students went out into the school. One of them walked past one of the other English teachers, and that English teacher returned to the staff room and said, Lisa, what did you do to your students? One of them came up to me and said, Mrs. Smith has lost the plot. She's not the person she was last term. I said, yeah, and I kind of explained, knowing it was a bit of a risk, but I really felt that it was worth it. And at the end of the day, the other Year 11s came in, and we did the whole thing. And I could debrief them. See, and I went, oh, miss, that's just the best lesson ever. The students who had actually read the novel on the holidays always gave me a knowing look because they knew what I was doing, but they did not spoil it for the rest of the students. And I would do that year in, year out. And it was really interesting to see students' responses. There was always one in the group that would be inclined to rebel against these outrageous draconian teaching methods. And it is dangerous. You have to be really careful who you do it with and how you do it. But I didn't know how else to get them to understand Winston's struggle, because the novel is really dense and it's dark and it's not easy, fun reading. And I thought if I could just get them to experience the outrage of an injustice, then maybe they would be able to relate to the novel a little bit more. 12 Angry Men is another one. A lot of schools do, and I can tell you how I manage that. But it's all about making connections between the students' lives and their emotions and the text itself. So you can see how that is a very strong connection. I know what this is like because. So those anticipatory guides can be a really good way into that to get students curious. Another one is contextualising. And we know that the syllabus talks about context a lot. Context, genre, audience, purpose. They're the 4 things that every assessment instrument must have for it to be a valid task in English. But it is very specific. The language we use when we're talking to the Queen is very different to the language we're talking to a close friend at the pub. The language your students use in the playground is very different to the language hopefully they're going to use in the classroom. So how do we contextualise students' learning? to make it meaningful and relevant. So we can target their senses. And you can see that there's a little bit of overlap between all different strategies. How do we target the senses? Well, if I brought in a mirror, I don't know if you get this might be too much of a reach. What concept that you hear around a lot at the moment with the younger generation of social media? It starts with N, it's a concept, it starts with N.
Narcissism?
Yes. What actually gave you the clue? Was it the mirror, or was it something else? Or was it the N?
You're saying like young people social media.
Oh really? That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So if you brought in realia, stuff, objects, props and things, then you can engage the senses in a very real way. And our Zoom people over here, we had a suggestion there about using different formats like films and so on. YouTube clips, music. I used to have music playing in my classrooms as students entered my classroom. And I used to try and make it theme appropriate, so that if we're doing Ned Kelly, they would be bush ballads from Ned Kelly's time. And that way you're immediately contextualizing the learning for the students from the moment they enter. It's a sensation for them. It takes a lot of effort and it takes a lot of work. In fact, I was going to play Imagine for you guys this morning, but then we had technology hiccups and things, so it didn't happen. But if you bring in some mirrors to explain to year 9 or year 10 students or your 8 students this really complicated concept of narcissism, and you get them to hold the mirror up, and then you show them some, images of someone looking into water and looking back at themselves, then that can be a far stronger experience than just reading them a blurb about narcissism or the dictionary definition. The dictionary definition is good and it needs to come, but in terms of getting students excited about their learning. So never underestimate the use of props. Bring them in. In 1984, for example, the concept of chains and being shackled is very strong. So take some chains in and design some activities around that. Okay, another one is representing text, which I have explained to you, but I really like this diagram because you go from the apple to the apple juice. All the chewing and the munching and the crunching is done at this point in here between the apple and the glass of juice. And basically what that is the exact example I gave you before. The scale scenario that student gave us. So in English classroom, getting students to read a chapter and asking them to represent it as a poem or as a song, or getting them to read a historical journal, like factually third person, get them to write a personal testimony. Anything that gets them using the content or the knowledge or the information they need to unpack that text into something else, because what will happen is those students who have any questions will go and ask the person next to them. Representing a scene in Shakespeare is great in standard Australian English. You say, okay, you're doing this scene, these lines, you're doing this scene, these lines, rewrite it into standard Australian English and act it out for us. It's amazing what the students will do. So representing text is a very powerful way to engage students. And here's another example. Anyone know what movie it's from?
Great Gatsby.
Yes, Great Gatsby. That is the Valley of Ashes. So if we asked students to watch a 3-minute or 2-minute clip from the movie where, characters are driving through at different times, or just give them this screenshot like that, now write a short poem. Those students are going to immerse themselves in that particular setting, and they're hopefully going to be able to answer more complex questions about the representations of society through that particular setting. Decay, moral bankruptcy, greed, the baseness of humanity, all those sorts of things. Now there's another one, schema building. It's a really fancy long word for something that's really quite simple, and it's just breaking stuff up into chunks, so digestible chunks. So if we have a look at Gatsby, we might want to talk to students about his downward spiral, because obviously he's very successful, very wealthy, he's the envy of all at the start of the novel. But that changes. And something else you can get students to do in terms of representing, but you could do this with them in terms of schema building. You could ask them, once you've studied the novel, to break the novel down into chunks for someone who might be 8 years old, or 15 years old, or whatever age you think is appropriate. And what I did was I thought, okay, if I want to break the novel down into 4 parts, 4 things that happen, then I could do it through images. So we could outline Gatsby's journey pictorially. So he is poor and penniless initially. Like, we open up with his great massive housing estate, but through flashbacks we find out that he was actually penniless. Penniless. Makes all this money through questionable means. Famous or infamous. Finds his love and they return to one another in a way, even though she's married to a questionable, very affluent man. And then the coffin. So you can see how schema building, if you've got English as additional language learners in your class, in fact, any student, if you break that down before you even give them the novel, they've got something to anchor themselves into. You know, hopefully we've also switched on the curiosity. Why go from here to here? And you can even get students to draw the graph. Like, he starts off penniless, reaches great heights, and then all goes bad. So schema building is very, very powerful. Now this is a Padlet that I did, and you can actually do the same thing, but to show a character's journey using passages from the novel. So I went back to the novel and I took key sections from it. And when you look at the PowerPoint on Blackboard, the link will be there. You can actually go into the Padlet and have a look. It actually took me a long time to do, a long time to build, because I had to go through the novel, and you could get students to do it, or you could do it depending on which phase of the learning you're at. Are you at the start of your unit, or are you at the middle, or are you at the end? And so I went and got just key sections that actually reflect those images. So I really strongly suggest you have a look at that. In fact, you should probably save it somewhere, because almost guaranteed at some point you'll be talking about The Great Gatsby, and it's something you can already use. It's a resource there for you. My plan was to go in and have a look at it, but with technology, because I'm using Zoom as well as other things, I don't want to push my luck too much. But you can see how that's pictorial, and this is using passages from the novel. In fact, you could do it for them, because you would model it, and then you could get students to do their own. But they have to use different passages to the ones that you have provided. Okay, and from there you can unpack representations. You can do so much. Once you've done that, that's not the end of the learning. There's so much more that you can still do with it all. You can say, well, here Gatsby's being represented as this, a very successful, wealthy, mysterious. What's the word we use? It's a really good word.
Enigmatic.
Thank you. Yes, enigmatic. And then here he's been represented as completely besotted with female character. Great.
Daisy.
Thank you, Daisy, because it was up there before. And completely in love, almost delirious, like a little boy. He's got all these toys that he's showing off, and so on. So you can work your way through that way. So we've talked about that. And again, you can do it in lots of different ways with lots of different characters. You can unpack the novel looking for other important cues. It might be another thing you want students to focus on, not so much characters, or maybe you've done the characters. This is one that I really like to do regularly throughout a unit of learning, because students respond to parts of texts for their own reasons, and they're all valid. And I really like hearing from them why a particular line resonates with them. I don't know if you noticed, but on Edmodo I did one with Macbeth, and students did actually engage with that. Which lines they liked the most, or which lines they liked and why they liked them. And when you do that, again, you're reaching deep into the student's understanding. You could just have it as add a favourite line to Padlet and not get them to explain why they like it if you want to. Like it was just a really gentle exercise or activity to get them in the mind of the English classroom. Maybe they've come in from morning tea or lunchtime. Or you might want to say, oh, now I want you to describe or define why you like it so much. And that's where that really deep thinking comes in. And you can see there that you're connecting to them. It's a form of bridging. It's schema building. You've probably modelled it beforehand. Developing metacognition, so this is another one. And that's why a lot of the research says that as a teacher, it's good practice to actually talk out loud as you're processing things as well with students. That when you do that, when you say things like, oh, I'm thinking now, I'm just finding this a bit difficult, we're teaching students in that instance to persevere and to recognise that that's a normal function of any human being, and that's how you get to the best bit, to those nuggets of knowledge. So research does say that teachers can model that ability to think about their thinking, even saying things like, I think a lot about Gatsby's ruin, and then explain why that affects them so much. So really, if we are modelling it, then hopefully our students will get a sense of what it looks like, sounds like, feels like. And then you can do some really specific activities. It's really beneficial for your students to know how they think or how they learn. Do students think best or learn best by annotating? I do. I know myself as a learner that if I'm reading a complex text, I like to underline, I like to circle, and I like to take notes in the margin. I actually sometimes, if the paragraph is talking about relationships, I'll actually draw a little diagram in the margin to connect, to show a flow chart or something, which is a form of representing the text. I'm really taking the words and putting them into a visual diagram. I'm transferring it because I'm thinking about how I'm thinking, and I'm making allowances. So
students these days, are they given a copy of the text? Do they read electronically? Do they buy their own copy? What's typically happening?
you have a huge variety out there actually. You'll have some schools who are online, really strong Google Classroom colleges, schools, and you'll have some that have set texts. If they're from lower socioeconomic areas, perhaps the same text will be used year in, year out. So the students can't actually annotate.
I was just thinking that.
Yeah, it's not their copy.
Do we think that there's any benefit or is there any disadvantage in reading electronically versus, real text? Is it?
You just opened up a minefield. There's a lot of research out there that says that reading in a tactile way, turning pages and engaging with the paper, provides deeper learning than reading on the screen.
Right.
I'm undecided because I know myself, I came from a generation where we used books and paper. So I know I've been trained to think that way. But I know there are some young kids coming through and getting top marks and they just naturally engage with the screen in a way that I don't quite so naturally. I still do, but if I'm doing really deep thinking, I need to engage with the paper. But I'm old. Like I'm not the next generation coming through.
Then audiobooks must be another layer again on that.
They're really beneficial for students who struggle with reading, but they're in your English classroom. I've had lots of conversations with parents about that. How do I get my child to engage with the novel? Audible is a great app. I use it if I'm doing long drives. Sometimes it's a really efficient use of time. You just plug it in and you listen to it. I'm not, and it's a different experience. Like when you're listening, you hear things and register and respond to things that you don't necessarily when you're reading it on the page. So I can read a novel and then listen to the novel, and I'll pick up things when I'm listening to it that I didn't pick up when I was reading it, vice versa. So it's actually an experience. Yeah, it's a hard one. I think there'll be a lot more on that as time progresses.
So I always wonder that, especially with Shakespeare, as it's meant to be watched, and so I've always struggled like at school when we just had to sit down and read Shakespeare and it was so dense. But then I had one year a teacher being like no, over the holidays, find one on YouTube and watch it with subtitles and read along, so you actually would get it. Because like we were reading it and we had no idea what emotion the scenes were supposed to be in, because you were just kind of like, I don't know what's going on, and like skimming.
Yeah.
Whereas like watching it, you were like,
I agree.
yeah, yeah, and that's why like sometimes when it's studied in English, it's not studied, and like it's supposed to be watched. Like as much as the writing is excellent and stuff like that, it's like the students don't understand it to that level. Like
you almost need to see it first.
yeah, and then
you can read it.
afterwards you can understand what's going on in the scene. But like if you just read it first, like you just don't take it in.
And that's actually the one genre that I would show the film first before I actually engaged with the text itself.
Because I think they just don't engage with the text otherwise.
And I think that's a fair thing. That language in that play is meant to be lived up out of your seat, stamping, you know, getting into someone's face. It's about experimenting with the nuances and the rhythm and the feel. And even being very mindful of where the commas are and why they're there that you're reading, which is why the suggestion was to read along, so you can see the commas and subconsciously or consciously you can see the actor pausing or providing a gesture at that point in time. So yeah, I agree.
I also think it's a much faster process. Like you watch a 2-hour play instead of the kids reading it for like 8 hours and trying to like slog through all the like words that they don't understand. Whereas I think, if they can watch it, then they're like, oh, at least I know what's going on. Like,
and choosing readers that will be prepared to take some risks and inject some expression into their voices and that sort of thing is often something that teachers have to model themselves. You need to come out of your shell and you know, be a little bit crazy and go, hey, you know, blah 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 blah, you know, and parrot something from the play, because if you want our students to do that, then we need to lead the way. So, and that's actually a good way to get them thinking about their thinking too. Like, what was the experience like when you watched the play versus now in class as we're reading it? And there's so many ways you can do it. Like with my year 10s when we're doing Romeo and Juliet, I'd set the class up into groups and each group would get their particular scene and we would read the scene in class, and then they'd all have to get up and act and do something using their own language afterwards or before, whichever way you wanted to do it, so that they're getting the Shakespearean experience but they're also bringing themselves to it. And some students are really shy and don't want to get involved, and others are really way out and provide a lot of hilarity, you know, and you can have fun with it as well. Now, there's this strategy called reciprocal teaching, and if you don't know what it is, I suggest you look it up, although I'm hoping to give you that experience in one of our workshops, so you will know what it feels like to actually do that strategy or engage with that strategy, because that will also help you when you go into classrooms. I often find, even for me, when I go to professional development workshops, if I've experienced in the workshop, I'm more likely to use it when I leave the workshop and go back to the classroom, because you know what it's like and it sticks. It's that whole idea of experiential learning. If you experience it, the learning is often deeper. Okay, is that still recording? Excellent. Okay. Now I'm probably going to drive you crazy with this, but this is a deliberate choice of image these are our objectives, they're the target. Understanding them. So